In the early 13th century, a terrifying force began to rise from the vast grasslands of Central Asia. Kingdoms across Asia and Europe had heard rumors, but few truly understood what was coming. The Mongols were not just another army. They were a storm. And at the center of that storm stood Genghis Khan. From humble beginnings on the harsh Mongolian steppe, he united rival tribes and forged the most ruthless and efficient war machine the medieval world had ever seen. His armies moved faster than any force before them. Their tactics were precise, terrifying, and devastating. Cities that resisted were erased. Empires that had ruled for centuries collapsed in a matter of months. But the destruction of armies and cities was only part of the story. For royal families, the Mongol invasion carried another kind of fear, one that spread through palaces long before the Mongol riders even appeared on the horizon. The fate of captured rulers. And especially, the fate of royal women. In medieval societies, queens and princesses were not simply family members of kings. They were symbols of legitimacy, dynasties, and political alliances. Marriages between royal houses shaped diplomacy, secured peace treaties, and strengthened empires. But when the Mongols conquered a kingdom, they did not follow the diplomatic traditions of the courts they destroyed. They created their own system, one built entirely on power. When a city surrendered quickly, the Mongols could sometimes show restraint. Local rulers might be allowed to remain as governors under Mongol authority. Tribute would flow to the steppe empire, and life, though forever changed, could continue. But when a city resisted, the consequences were catastrophic. The Mongol armies believed that resistance deserved total destruction. Entire populations could be wiped out to send a message that echoed across continents. Resistance was futile. And in the aftermath of these conquests, royal women often found themselves at the center of a new political reality. To the Mongols, capturing members of a royal family was not merely about revenge or humiliation. It was strategy. Royal women could become powerful instruments in the expansion of Mongol rule. Some were married into the Mongol elite, forming alliances that strengthened the empire's control over newly conquered lands. Others were absorbed into noble households across the vast Mongol territories. The goal was clear. Power must be consolidated. Loyalty must be enforced. And the bloodlines of conquered rulers could be turned into tools of the empire. In some cases, these marriages were arranged to stabilize regions that had recently been conquered. By integrating royal women into Mongol aristocratic families, the conquerors created political bonds that made rebellion far more difficult. But this system also carried a harsh reality. The identity of these women, once queens, princesses, or heirs to powerful dynasties, was forever altered. Their kingdoms were gone, their courts destroyed, their lives rewritten under the rule of the Mongol Empire. And yet, the story of Mongol conquest was not only about brutality. It was also about unexpected transformations. Some royal women captured during Mongol campaigns would go on to wield influence within the empire itself. In a society where elite women sometimes held significant authority, a few would navigate the dangerous politics of the Mongol court and reshape their destinies. But others would simply vanish from history. Names lost. Stories forgotten. Lives swallowed by the expanding empire. As the Mongol armies pushed westward, kingdom after kingdom fell before them. From the cities of Central Asia to the powerful states of the Middle East and Eastern Europe, the same fear spread among royal courts. What would happen if the Mongols arrived? For kings, it meant war. For queens and princesses, it meant uncertainty, a future no royal family had ever imagined. Because once the Mongol banners appeared on the horizon, the fate of entire dynasties could change overnight. And the fate of royal women would become part of the Mongol Empire's vast and terrifying legacy. When Mongol armies approached a kingdom, panic spread quickly through the royal courts. Messengers would arrive breathless, bringing terrifying news. Entire cities had fallen in days. Massive armies had been crushed in open battle. Fortified walls that once seemed impenetrable had been breached with shocking speed. For kings, the decision was clear: surrender or fight. But for queens and royal women, the options were far less certain. The Mongols followed a strict philosophy during conquest. Cities that surrendered early could sometimes be spared. Their rulers might keep limited authority under Mongol supervision. Tribute would be demanded, but destruction might be avoided. Yet many rulers underestimated the scale and discipline of the Mongol war machine. They resisted, and resistance almost always ended the same way. When Mongol forces stormed a city, the royal palace became one of the first targets. The capture of a ruler's family was not simply a matter of prestige. It was a strategic move designed to completely dismantle the political structure of a kingdom. Without the royal family, resistance often collapsed. This approach was used repeatedly during the campaigns of Genghis Khan and his successors as the Mongol Empire expanded across Asia. When cities fell, royal courts that had once been centers of luxury and power were suddenly transformed into scenes of chaos. Servants fled. Treasures were seized. Dynasties that had ruled for generations were brought to an abrupt end. For royal women, capture often meant being transported far from their homeland. The Mongols controlled enormous territories stretching from the steppes of Mongolia to the borders of Europe. Captives could be relocated thousands of kilometers away from the kingdoms where they were born. This separation served a purpose. It prevented rebellion. A queen far from her homeland had little ability to inspire resistance among her former people. Instead, many royal women were absorbed into the Mongol aristocracy. The Mongol elite practiced a system of political marriages that helped strengthen their rule over newly conquered regions. By marrying captured princesses or noblewomen into Mongol families, they created connections between the conquerors and the conquered. These alliances were not always purely symbolic. They could influence diplomacy, stabilize newly conquered territories, and legitimize Mongol authority in regions where local populations still respected their former royal bloodlines. But the transition was rarely easy. Imagine a queen who had once ruled beside a king, surrounded by advisors and courtiers, suddenly finding herself in a completely different world. The Mongol steppe culture was vastly different from the palace societies of Persia, China, or Central Asia. Life was mobile, power structures were fluid, and survival often depended on adapting quickly to the political dynamics of the Mongol court. Yet there was an unexpected reality within Mongol society. Elite Mongol women sometimes held considerable influence. They could manage estates, oversee political negotiations, and even command loyalty among powerful tribes. Because of this, some captured royal women were able to navigate their new circumstances with remarkable resilience. History records several cases where women connected to conquered dynasties later became influential figures within Mongol-controlled territories. However, many others simply disappeared from the historical record. Their stories were never written down. Their names were forgotten. The Mongol Empire expanded so rapidly that the lives of countless individuals, including royal women, were lost within the vast machinery of conquest. And as Mongol armies continued their relentless campaigns westward, new kingdoms faced the same terrifying question that had haunted rulers across Asia. What would happen if the Mongols arrived at their gates? For kings, it meant war and survival. But for queens and princesses, it meant stepping into a future shaped entirely by the will of the world's most powerful empire. For many conquered kingdoms, the Mongol invasion marked the end of independence. But for royal women captured during these campaigns, the story did not always end with imprisonment or disappearance. Sometimes, it began with marriage. To outside observers, this practice seemed shocking. Royal princesses and queens who once belonged to powerful dynasties suddenly became part of Mongol households. Yet within the structure of the Mongol Empire, these marriages were not random acts of cruelty. They were calculated political strategies. The Mongol Empire was expanding faster than any empire before it. Territories across Central Asia, China, Persia, and Eastern Europe fell under Mongol control in a matter of decades. Governing such a vast empire required more than military strength. It required alliances. One of the most effective ways to secure loyalty in the medieval world was through marriage. By marrying royal women from conquered dynasties into Mongol noble families, the conquerors created bonds that helped stabilize newly captured regions. These marriages served multiple purposes. They tied local elites to the Mongol ruling class. They helped legitimize Mongol authority in regions where the population still respected the bloodlines of their former rulers. And they reduced the likelihood of rebellion by blending the identities of conqueror and conquered. This strategy became particularly visible during the rule of Ogdi Khan, the son and successor of Genghis Khan. As the empire expanded westward and southward, political marriages became an important tool for maintaining control. Royal women from defeated dynasties were sometimes married to Mongol generals, princes, or high-ranking officials. From the outside, it looked like a complete reversal of status. But within the Mongol system, these women could still hold influence. Mongol society, unlike many other medieval cultures, allowed elite women a surprising level of authority. Noble women could control wealth, manage households, and even influence political decisions. Some royal women from conquered kingdoms learned to navigate this new world. Instead of disappearing into obscurity, they adapted. They learned the language of the steppe. They understood the customs of the Mongol court. And in some cases, they became powerful intermediaries between Mongol rulers and the local populations they governed. These women could act as cultural bridges. Their knowledge of their homeland's traditions, languages, and politics made them valuable advisors within Mongol-controlled territories. However, adaptation was not always possible. Many royal women struggled to survive in this unfamiliar environment. The Mongol court was a place of shifting alliances, rival factions, and constant political tension. Power was never completely secure. Even members of the Mongol royal family could fall suddenly from favor. For a woman who had once lived in a palace surrounded by loyal servants, entering this unpredictable world could be deeply unsettling. And yet, the Mongol Empire had a way of transforming the roles of those who entered it. In the courts of Persia, China, and Central Asia, royal women had traditionally lived behind layers of court protocol and ceremonial life. But on the steppe, influence often depended on adaptability, intelligence, and political awareness. Those who understood this could survive. Some could even thrive. Yet the broader reality remained harsh. The kingdoms these women once belonged to had vanished. Their dynasties had been broken. The Mongol Empire was reshaping the political map of the world, and royal families across Eurasia were being absorbed into its expanding structure. And as the Mongol armies continued pushing westward toward Europe and southward into the Middle East, the same pattern repeated again and again. Cities fell. Royal courts collapsed. And the fate of royal women became entangled with the unstoppable rise of the Mongol Empire. To many of the kingdoms conquered by the Mongols, the fate of royal women seemed tragic and final. Queens were captured. Princesses were taken far from their homelands. Royal dynasties disappeared almost overnight. But inside the Mongol Empire, something unexpected sometimes happened. Some of these women did not simply disappear into the households of Mongol nobles. They rose to power. Unlike many medieval societies, Mongol culture allowed elite women to exercise significant authority. While men led armies across continents, women often managed the political and economic foundations of the empire. They supervised trade routes, controlled wealth, and sometimes ruled entire territories. This tradition had existed even before the empire was founded. Steppe societies depended heavily on cooperation between men and women. When warriors rode to war, women maintained the camps, herds, and political alliances that kept the tribe functioning. As the Mongol Empire expanded, that tradition continued. One of the most remarkable examples was Torjin Khatun. After the death of Ogidi Khan, the empire faced a dangerous moment of uncertainty. Rival factions competed for power, and the future of the empire hung in the balance. During this time, Torjin Khatun stepped forward as regent. For several years, she effectively ruled the Mongol Empire, the largest empire the world had ever seen at that time. She controlled the imperial court, influenced the selection of the next great Khan, and managed the vast administrative network that governed territories stretching from China to Eastern Europe. Her authority was recognized across the empire. And she was not alone. Another powerful figure was Sorghutani Beki, widely regarded by historians as one of the most capable political minds of the Mongol era. Originally connected to a rival tribe conquered by the Mongols, Sorghutani Beki later became a central figure within the imperial family. Through careful political strategy, she ensured that her sons would rise to extraordinary positions of power. One of those sons was Kublai Khan, who would eventually rule China and establish the Yuan dynasty. Sorghutani's influence was immense. She managed vast territories, maintained political alliances, and helped shape the future leadership of the empire itself. Stories like these reveal a surprising dimension of Mongol rule. Women within the empire could hold real authority, sometimes greater authority than many queens in the conquered kingdoms ever possessed. But this power came with constant danger. The Mongol court was a place of intense rivalry. Alliances shifted quickly, and political survival required careful maneuvering. A powerful woman could influence emperors and shape imperial decisions, but she also faced enemies who watched for any sign of weakness. And for royal women captured during Mongol conquests, the path to influence was far from guaranteed. Most would never rise to positions like Torjin Khatun or Sorgatani Beki. Many lived quiet lives far from their former homes. Others became minor figures in the vast aristocratic networks that supported Mongol rule. Yet the possibility remained. Inside the Mongol Empire, identity could be transformed. A captured princess might become the wife of a powerful noble. A foreign noblewoman might gain influence within the imperial court. And occasionally, a woman could rise to shape the destiny of the empire itself. The Mongol conquests destroyed countless kingdoms. But they also created one of the most complex political systems of the medieval world. A system where power sometimes emerged in the most unexpected places. Even from the ruins of conquered dynasties. When the thunder of Mongol horses finally faded across the steppes, the world they left behind had been permanently changed. Entire kingdoms had fallen. Cities that once stood as centers of power were reduced to ashes. Dynasties that had ruled for centuries vanished in a single generation. The Mongol Empire stretched farther than any empire before it, from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Europe. But the story of conquest was not written only in battles and burning cities. It was also written in the lives of the women who survived those conquests. For many royal women captured during Mongol campaigns, life became a strange balance between loss and adaptation. They had watched their families fall, their kingdoms disappear, and their identities transformed overnight. Yet survival required adjustment. Some women gradually integrated into the Mongol aristocracy. Through marriage alliances, they became part of the ruling networks that governed the empire. Their children grew up speaking multiple languages, belonging to cultures that blended steppe traditions with the customs of conquered lands. These children represented a new kind of dynasty, one that carried bloodlines from both conquerors and conquered. Over time, this blending reshaped entire regions. Mongol rulers adopted administrative systems from China and Persia. Trade routes flourished under Mongol protection, connecting distant civilizations across the Silk Road. And within this enormous empire, the descendants of conquered queens and princesses quietly became part of the ruling elite. Yet the memory of conquest never completely faded. In chronicles written by defeated kingdoms, the Mongols were often described as a storm, unstoppable, merciless, and terrifying. Stories about the fate of captured royalty circulated for generations, becoming warnings about the consequences of resistance. Some accounts were exaggerated by fear. Others were painfully real. But the emotional weight of those stories endured. For the royal women themselves, legacy was complicated. A queen who had once ruled a palace might spend the rest of her life in a foreign court. A princess raised to inherit power might instead become a political bride within the empire that conquered her homeland. And yet, history shows that these women were not simply passive victims of conquest. Many adapted with remarkable resilience. They learned new languages. They navigated unfamiliar courts. They raised children who would inherit positions of influence in the world's largest empire. Their survival required intelligence, patience, and strength that rarely appeared in official chronicles. Historians today increasingly recognize that the Mongol Empire was not sustained by warriors alone. It also depended on diplomacy, administration, and complex family alliances, many of which were shaped by women. Some Mongol noblewomen became powerful political figures. Some foreign princesses introduced new cultural traditions to the imperial court. Others lived quietly, raising families far from the lands they once called home. But all of them carried the memory of worlds that had disappeared beneath the hooves of Mongol horses. The Mongol Empire eventually fragmented into smaller khanates. Over time, those states blended into the cultures they ruled. New kingdoms emerged, new dynasties rose, and the memory of the great conquests slowly turned into legend. Yet echoes of those events remain even today. In bloodlines, in historical records, and in the stories of the royal women whose lives were forever changed by one of the most powerful empires in human history. Because conquest does not only redraw borders, it reshapes lives. And sometimes, the most extraordinary stories of survival belong not to the conquerors, but to those who endured their victories.